Welcome to History at the OK Corral. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and share this episode with a fellow history lover. And now, on to tonight's episode. January 24th, 1599. Acoma, Pueblo, New Mexico. 26-year-old Spanish conquistador Vicente de Zaldivar stares angrily into the pre-dawn darkness, mentally rehearsing the plan he and his officers have agreed to. They will make a head-on charge, it has been decided. Their cannon will be put to use. And before the sun sets on another chilly winter's day, de Zaldivar feels assured that victory will belong to himself and his men. They have been ensconced here at the base of this mesa and the sparse expanses of this unforgiving desert for 2 days, laying siege to the natives within the adobe brick walls. But despite their formidable advantage in both firepower and personnel, they have been, as of yet, unable to overtake their intended objective. Their presence here is the inevitable result of two worlds colliding. While they are ultimately only the martial enforcement of policies dictated by a king and influenced by a pope, thousands of miles away, the actions they are about to take will ultimately have reverberations felt throughout both the new and old worlds. However, while geopolitics indeed plays a role in the attack these soldiers of Spain are about to undertake, they are here today primarily for the sake of their own personal vengeance and retribution. In little more than a century since Christopher Columbus's landing in the Caribbean, Spain's relentless incursion into the Americas has been rivaled only by the British, the French, and the Dutch. Following Hernán Cortés's overthrow of the Aztecs in 1519, the Spanish spread north and westward has been startlingly swift and strikingly violent. The Spanish had founded New Spain, encompassing the vast majority of what today comprises both Central and North Americas, in 1521. For much of the latter half of the 16th century, the Spanish had concentrated significant amounts of their efforts on settling the area. The Spanish and the Acoma people had first come into contact around the year 1540, and for decades had lived in essentially peaceful coexistence. However, in the preceding few years, the Spanish attempts at subjugating the Pueblo peoples of what is today's central and northern New Mexico had become both more concentrated and more consistent. The Spanish governor, Don Oñate, had spent considerable time and resources on settling the region and bringing the native inhabitants to bear as subjects of both the Spanish crown and, simultaneously, the Catholic Church. In 1595, Oñate was granted permission from King Philip II to colonize Santa Fe de Nuevo Mexico, the present-day state of New Mexico. This led to his involvement in devising a plan to overthrow the Acoma chieftains and conquer their pueblo by force. With the full weight of the Spanish crown's oversight now upon them, Oñate feels the Acoma can no longer be allowed to run unfettered about the Spanish territory as unbaptized, disobedient citizens. However, in 1598, his plans for a violent overthrow had leaked to the Acoma, who were rightfully incensed and understandably terrified. Among many Acoma, it was still believed that the Spanish were, with their steel armor and cacophonous firearms, impervious to harm. Also adding to the Spanish air of invincibility is their exclusive access to a technology no natives on the American continent possessed: the horse. Since landing in the New World, horses and horsemanship have been closely guarded aspects of European technology that it was believed must never be allowed to fall into native hands. This perception of the Spanish, as well as the Spanish's well-known track record of harshly dealing with their opposition, had led many among the Acoma to advocate for a conciliatory approach to dealing with the Spanish. Well aware of the Acoma's willingness to acquiesce, Don Oñate had sent his nephew, Vicente de Zaldivar's brother, Juan, to negotiate a peace agreement with the Acoma. This was seen as a plum assignment and a way to pad the budding young Juan's record as a diplomat and military leader. On December 4, 1598, Juan de Zaldivar had marched up the steep slopes of the mesa with 16 conquistadors under his command and resolutely demanded food. Their trek had been tiresome, and they were indeed in great need of sustenance, but their presumption and aggression had quickly led to a violent altercation with the Acoma. The conquistadors had allegedly assaulted some of the Acoma women, actions which led to the death of Juan de Zaldivar and 11 of the 16 soldiers under his charge. Upon receiving the news of his nephew's demise at the hands of the Acoma, Don Oñate had flown into a rage, promising revenge against them. It was Oñate who had ordered Vicente de Zaldivar to lead the expedition avenging his brother's death. Vicente and his men had arrived at the Acoma Pueblo on January 21st of 1599, and the battle had begun in earnest on the following morning. The formidable walls surrounding the Pueblo had, for 2 days, held the attempts of the Spanish to infiltrate them at bay. Repeated incursions had been made with the hope of a headlong charge being avoided, as well as avoiding the arduous task of hauling their field cannons up the steep, rocky slopes in order to breach the walls. Now, just before the sun's rays pierced the eastern skyline, Vicente de Zaldivar gives his force of roughly 70 men the order to advance. Huddled inside their homes, quieting their children and steeling their own nerves, the Acoma can hear the clattering of the armored Spaniards advancing up the slopes with their artillery in tow. Though they have witnessed the Spanish fire upon them in the preceding few days with their arquebuses, the Acoma have yet to face the full brunt of the Spanish cannons. Though far shorter than their maritime counterparts, the field cannons carried by the Spanish on this day provide a powerful tactical as well as a psychological advantage. The walls of the adobe, though expertly constructed and remarkably durable, are no match for cannonballs. The deafening roar of the cannons also provides a factor of shock and awe that are of comparable, if not equal, value in attacking an enemy as of yet unfamiliar with their capabilities. Just as the morning sun has risen high enough to illuminate the strange actions of the Spaniards as they make ready to fire, the Acoma look on in equal parts curiosity and horror. Moments later, the command to fire the first volley is given, and the placid sounds of the desert morning are instantly drowned out in a roar of cannon fire. Of the estimated 6,000 Acoma inhabitants, roughly 2,000 are full-fledged warriors, now readying themselves for a third successive day of resisting the Spanish onslaught. As they watch the damage being steadily inflicted upon the outer walls of the Pueblo, they come to the chilling realization that soon the only barrier between the cannon fire and their families will be themselves. The Spanish onslaught continues, as the wailing and lamentations of the women and children fill the air. As cannonballs continue to plow into the thick walls, the complications for the defending Acoma begin to compound. Soon, in addition to the emerging gap in the defensive wall, the smell of acrid smoke permeates the air. The dried straw mixed into the adobe has begun to smolder with the incessant heat of the cannonballs assaulting it. Soon, the fire is growing rapidly, as are the panicked cries of the men, women, and children, now all trapped within the confines of the Pueblo. Finally, after hours of bombardment, Vicente de Zaldivar gives the final command for the Conquistadors to draw their swords and storm the Pueblo. Within minutes, the several dozen heavily armed and highly trained soldiers pour past the barriers of the walls and into the city streets of the Pueblo. For hours, a bitter, vicious battle rages, in which the Spanish cut down even the most tacit opposition, be they warriors, women, or children. By late afternoon, the Acoma Pueblo's peaceable confines have turned into a smoke-strewn, blood-soaked scene from a nightmare. Roughly 500 Acoma warriors lie dead, most having died courageously in vicious hand-to-hand combat defending their loved ones. Additionally, roughly 300 women and children have fallen to Spanish swords and arquebus fire. Now, as the afternoon sun begins to wane, Vicente de Zaldivar, still seething over the death of his brother, orders 500 of the Acoma villagers placed in chains. Amidst the weeping of children and mothers who would never see each other again, the Spanish summarily marched the captured Acoma off to the San Juan Pueblo, where Governor Don Oñate waits with an abiding fury. Upon his arrival, Vicente de Zaldivar is made the object of Oñate's praise, and the prisoners are made the target of his merciless rage. Initially, the seizing Oñate ordered that every male over the age of 25 should have their right foot cut off, and subsequently enslaved for 20 years. The same period of enslavement was to befall any male prisoner between the ages of 12 and 25, and any female prisoners over the age of 12. Ultimately, 24 of the captured warriors would suffer the totality of their sentences. The rest would be dispersed throughout the Jesuit mission system that had already been established even here on the furthest outreaches of the Spanish frontier. Many of the younger women would ultimately be sent to convents in Mexico City to serve out lives as nuns, 2 of the male prisoners had their hands amputated and were sent out amongst the neighboring tribes as walking warning signs not to contest the newly declared authority of the Spanish crown. It would be King Philip II himself, however, who would issue a personal order banishing Don Oñate from the entirety of the New Mexico territory for good. Even with the ostensible might of one of Europe's most powerful empires backing them, it was readily apparent to the king that such needlessly violent retributive actions would only ultimately cause the Spanish more problems in their attempts to advance their empire and grow their economy. Oñate would eventually retire to Spain, where he would work as the head of all mining inspectors until his death in 1626. Don Oñate presents an incredibly controversial and consequential figure in the story of the Spanish in the New World. He is vilified by many, revered by some, and often heralded as the last of the Conquistadors. The end of his story is, however, far from the end of the story of the Spanish incursion into what is today North, Central, and South America. The actions taken by Don Oñate would have consequences that reverberated for decades, ultimately culminating in the largest native revolt in North American history. The tales of bloodshed, coexistence, survival, and heroism are too numerous to cover in a single episode. And so, for tonight, they are other stories for other times. Thank you for joining us on this episode of History at the OK Corral. Be sure to click the like button, share this episode with a friend, and become a subscriber. And if you'd like to support our work and gain early access to episodes, as well as ad-free viewing, you can become a member of this channel by clicking on the Join button below, or click the link in the description to become a member on Patreon. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next time on History at the OK Corral, home of history's greatest shootouts and showdowns.